Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel here on Potomac Watch. So Nikki Haley has vowed on Saturday night to press forward with the Michigan primary on Tuesday of this week, and then next week with the Super Tuesday primaries a week from Tuesday. Let's listen to Haley talk about the results on Saturday night.
Today in South Carolina, we're getting around 40% of the vote. That's about what we got in New Hampshire, too. I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%. But I also know 40% is not some tiny group. There are huge numbers of voters in our Republican primaries who are saying they want an alternative. I'm not giving up this fight when a majority of Americans disapprove of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. South Carolina has spoken. We're the fourth state to do so. In the next 10 days, another 21 states and territories will speak. They have the right to a real choice, not a Soviet-style election with only one candidate. And I have a duty to give them that choice. We can't afford 4 more years of Biden's failures or Trump's lack of focus.
Well, Bill, she's still promising to run at least for the next 8 days or so. On the other hand, Americans for Prosperity Action, the Charles Koch group, has pulled their funding for her. They've been big supporters of her, and they still support her. They just said, we're going to take our marginal dollars and we're going to put them into competitive House and Senate races, which essentially means they're conceding the presidential race to Donald Trump. So unless there's a big breakthrough here, I think, for her in Super Tuesday or Michigan, probably her days are numbered. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's an unusual year. It's always an unusual year when Donald Trump is in the primaries, right? He doesn't play by the rules. And I don't mean that necessarily he cheats or anything. I mean, he defies expectations and doesn't do what a normal candidate would do. And that has served him well in a lot of instances, also served him ill in some. But you never know. I thought maybe in the debates that one of the Republicans would emerge. Trump shunning the debates kind of put them in second tier. If anything, Haley surged past DeSantis during those debates, kind of a minor development, but they didn't deliver anything big. Nothing in the general scheme of the primary was changed. I think the primary votes are not going to change things. You know, Donald Trump's a favorite. You know, whenever I hear someone talk about moral victories or defying expectations, I put the old L up in the column for lost. I rooted for too many sports teams where the announcer said it was a moral victory, and I went to bed sad because they lost. That said, because Donald Trump is so unpredictable and things around him just happen, and he has 91 indictments and all these cases, you never know if there's a mine on the way to the nomination. He could be blown off the tracks. It's not going to come from the usual way, which is a rival Republican candidate. But if he's blown off the tracks, she's not automatically guaranteed that she'd step in the breach, but she could have a good case. I stayed in. I didn't quit even when everything was against me. And, you know, I stood for these principles. She would have a good case. If there's an open convention, all bets are off. And I think both with Joe Biden and with Donald Trump, that's a real possibility.
Well, that would take almost certainly a conviction in one of the criminal cases, I think, or some physical health issue. Hard to see what else could interfere there with Trump. Kim, she is accumulating some delegates, not a lot of delegates, but more than anybody else. And presumably we'll pick up a few more here as the next contests go forward the next 8 days. What do you think her goal here is, both this year and then as it sets her up for a potential run in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody can say at this point, barring a circumstance like what Bill suggests, something very unusual, that her goal can be winning the nomination. As you say, she has few delegates. She has 20. Trump now has 110. And going forward, the coming states are going to be very, very difficult. There are 5 races before we get to Super Tuesday. A lot of those are small. For instance, all 5 people who are Republican in Washington, D.C. will go to vote in a primary. But when you look to Super Tuesday, it's a very rough road for her to get more delegates because the RNC, as well as the DNC, and Trump supporters in the RNC have fixed the rules to make it very difficult for anyone other than the front runner to win. So a lot of those races are closed primaries again, open only to Republicans. Most of them are winner-take-all scenarios. Some of these states have what are called bonus delegates. So if they are Republican-run in the legislature or the governor, they get additional delegates. Chances are by mid-March, he will have solidly got all the delegates that he needs to clinch the nomination. So I think she's setting herself up for a couple of things. One is possibly to be his running mate. That seems unlikely given the animosity he has had toward her for staying in, although I think you could make a good argument for why that would be a stronger ticket. But maybe simply, and sometimes you see candidates doing this, setting themselves up for the next go-round. She obviously has cemented her name in Republican Party circles as a fighter and somebody who the party's younger could look to. So I think this is maybe a little bit more about preparing for the future.
Trump is not known for his grace in victory, and he's probably going to hold it against Haley for continuing to stay in the race when it comes to his choice for VP. So I don't think that that's the place for her. I think one of the possibilities is that she's basically saying now Trump is going to lose, and if he does lose, she'll have standing to say, see, Republicans, I told you. And now we need to move in a different direction. Of course, that depends on whether Trump loses or not. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll have Trump laying out what his strategy is in the general election, at least giving us some hints, and a Michigan jolt to Joe Biden when we come back. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker. Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. Let's listen to Donald Trump at the Conservative Political Action Conference offer his themes for his candidacy.
If crooked Joe Biden and his thugs win in 2024, the worst is yet to come. Our country will go and sink to levels that were unimaginable. And just think about it. With 4 more years of Biden, the hordes of illegal aliens stampeding across our borders will exceed 40 to 50 million people. Medicare, Social Security, health care, and public education will buckle and collapse. It will collapse as sure as you're sitting or standing there. It will collapse. Our economy will be starved of energy by Crooked Joe's vindictive Green New Scam. It's a Green New Scam. It'll be the destruction of our country.
Well, there's a parade of horribles, if I've ever heard one. I mean, his observation that Medicare and Social Security will collapse if Biden wins. Donald Trump is pledging not to do anything about those programs. So I think they're on the road to collapse no matter who wins, whether Trump or Biden. But anyway, I think that gives you a flavor for what his campaign's going to be like, which is it's going to be the country is going to just be destroyed if Biden wins. And on the flip side, Biden is going to say the country will be destroyed, will no longer be a democracy if Trump wins. So it's really going to be a hell of a campaign.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Paul, you mentioned Haley as VP. In the normal Republican year, the logical thing would be for her to be the VP, right? She has an important constituency where Trump is weak among Democrats and independents. They complement each other in a way. They're opposite strengths. But I think the personal animosity, as you say, is so big that I don't think he could do it. The other thing, the problem is, as I see it, people constantly cite polls saying most Americans don't want Trump versus Biden. I think that's true, but I think if you dig a little deeper, there are kind of different problems in both parties. First of all, it underestimates that Trump is highly popular with a sizable chunk of the Republican Party, which Biden isn't. The problem is, though Trump's popular with that, he's really unpopular with the anti-Trump people more than Biden is. In other words, come election day, I suspect that Democrats, most of whom think he's too old to be president, would still rally around and vote for Joe Biden. I'm not sure Republicans, the ones who didn't vote for Trump in the primaries, would turn out for Trump that day. It'll be very interesting. It's another way how the rules are all changing. And in many ways, it's going to be who's worse. The choice of lesser evils, who's worse for the country. And it's going to be very heated. No one's really making a positive case. I mean, Trump had some things he could campaign on, like the tax cuts. I lowered taxes. I turned back some regulations. He could do a lot of things. And he's not emphasizing those. I don't know why. And Joe Biden certainly isn't boasting about his agenda after he tried to sell Bidenomics and it was a flop.
All righty. We'll have a lot more, of course. If, in fact, it is Biden versus Trump, this will be the longest presidential race in history. This was our fate, bad career choices. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. Kim, I want to ask you about Michigan because it's pretty interesting what's developing there. We have the primary tomorrow. Joe Biden's on the ballot. Doesn't have serious competition. I guess Dean Phillips is also on the ballot, the Minnesota congressman, but he hasn't caught fire. But the movement on the left, led by Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman from Michigan and others, is to vote uncommitted in Michigan to send a message to Biden that his policy towards Israel is opposed by a significant chunk of the party. Gretchen Whitmer, for example, the governor of Michigan, saying, oh, please don't do that. Don't do that. We need to give Joe Biden as much support as possible. Debbie Dingell, representative from that Dearborn district, which is heavily Palestinian. I mean, she might be south of there now, but anyway, she's, represented that district in the past. And she also said, no, don't do that, vote for Biden. But how big a threat is this to Biden?
I think it's a real threat, and I find that absolutely fascinating. But it is also an encapsulation of this presidency and what drives this presidency, which is fear of the left. Think about it. Joe Biden wasn't remotely rattled when Dean Phillips got into the race. Ostensibly, Dean Phillips is somewhat challenging him from the right. You'd have thought that there was some in the party that would gravitate toward that Dean Phillips might be making more of a show than he is. So far, he's been a non-entity. And yet, instead, the big threat here is the squad, as it were, Rashida Tlaib, and this threat that because he's not dancing to the left's tune when it comes to Hamas and the Palestinian cause, that this could result in a very big embarrassment in a primary in which he's fundamentally running uncontested, but could have a very poor showing. And the follow-on dynamics of that are fascinating, too. I mean, this is why Whitmer's practically out there pleading with people not to do this. It'd be a big black eye for her if this is a state that really offers a rebuke up to Joe Biden. If she had any interest in sort of forward policies or forward platform in the party, that doesn't look well for her. And so we'll see how this all turns out. But I think it says a great deal, Paul, about where the center of power is, at least among those who are most vocal in the Democratic Party at the moment.
Well, the two big potential implications of a big uncommitted vote would be, one, a signal to Biden that his hold on Michigan in November is in jeopardy. Trump has been tied or leading in some of the polling against Biden in Michigan. Biden won that by about 3 percentage points in 2020, but it was a close race. Either one of those candidates are going to need, Biden in particular is going to need Michigan. But the other implication before we get to November is, how does this influence Biden's policies on Israel and the Middle East? I mean, you can see how Biden, his instinct was after October 7th to support Israel wholeheartedly, support the destruction of Hamas, understand that Israel needed to be able to wage war in Gaza, back Israel. But slowly, his policy has evolved, Bill. I'm going to give you the last word, towards criticizing Israel. He's now flipped the Biden policy on settlements in the West Bank, saying they're illegal, and now U.S. policy is opposed to any more settlements. He says we don't want the Israeli military to go into Rafah in Gaza, the last big stronghold of Hamas. So this vote in Michigan tomorrow could have a big impact on U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I already think it is. As you mentioned, Joe Biden has been sliding away from his initial strong stand on Israel, to take, sometimes they're not in public, but to advise Israel against its military operations and call for a ceasefire, and said, what was it in the famous press conference at night after the special counsel report? He talked about the over-the-top Israel expansion.
Right, over the top, yep.
And I wrote a column earlier this year, and I was saying, I think the Democratic Convention this year in Chicago may look like the Democratic Convention in 1968 in Chicago, when inside you had kind of sensible policies, Hubert Humphrey fighting, outside the anti-war protesters bitterly clashed with police. And Humphrey was kind of caught. He was a traditional Dove who had embraced a hawkish agenda in Vietnam because of Johnson, and they were stuck with that. I think Biden knows that. He's afraid of the left because they can make trouble, and they've already made a lot of worrying noises in the party. Letters from different people in the State Department, his administration, his campaign even criticizing the policy. So I think that's really what he has his eye on.
All right, we are going to watch that carefully. Maybe the most drama on Tuesday evening in the Michigan primary. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Bill. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and we appreciate your patronage. Thanks for listening.